Students, good evening again. In the previous lectures, we have discussed the concept of the cost of goods sold statements. But before that, we have basically discussed that what are the main costs in the manufacturing. So the main costs in the manufacturing are the direct material, the direct labor, and the factory overhead. Just a brief overview. So direct material means what? Whenever there is a production, the first thing, the basic thing, what we need for the production is the raw material. Now, the material can be a direct material or it can be an indirect material. So the raw material has two types. So direct material means what? That the value is more or it is easily visible, okay, or the quantity is more. So that will be considered as the direct material. For example, we have a wood in the wooden furniture, steel in the cars, the plastic board in the markers, then the gold in the jewelry, or the sugar in the industry drink. So these are some of the basic examples that how we decide that is the direct material or indirect material. Simply, that in the wooden furniture, the main ingredient, the main part or the main material what they are using is the wood. So that will be considered as the direct material. In the same way, in the car, what is the main thing? When you see at the car, normally you see what? The steel. So that is the steel, that is the direct material for the manufacturing of the cars. In the energy drinks, the main ingredients you can say with respect to the value or with respect to the quantity. So that is the sugar. In the board marker, for example, the main thing when you look at that, the main thing which you can see, the visibility, that is the plastic. Or even when we talk about the cost is more as compared to the other parts or other materials in that. And then the gold in the jewelry, obviously if there's a gold jewelry, so the gold that is used, that will be considered as the direct material. Then the direct labor is what? Any labor or any worker who are directly working on the machines while producing the goods. So in the factory, the person who is working on the machine, who is directly involved in the production process, that will be called as the direct labor. So it may be a steel cutter on the machines, it may be a machine labor, or it may be a steel welder, or it may be a wood cutter, or labor on the juice extraction plant, or the person who is working, for example, in the manufacturing of the car. So that person will be considered what? That person will be considered as the direct labor. But there are some indirect costs are there, or indirect materials are there, indirect labors are there, or other factory costs are there. So all those factory costs are included in the factory overhead, or what we call the production overhead. For example, in the wooden furniture, the main thing is the wood. But obviously there are some supplementary materials are there, the materials which are used in the less quantity. So let's say that the screws are there, glue is there. They are using the some of the paints or the polish. In the same way, for example, in the cars, they are also using some other parts. For example, there may be some using aluminium parts, or they may be using some rubber in that one. So that will be considered what? As the indirect material. For example, in the plastic whiteboard, we have a mainly whiteboard marker, that is the plastic. But there may be some other, like they are using the colors, this paint, or this may be for the writing purpose. Some printing is there, so that is the indirect material that you are using. So in the same way, in the jewelry, the gold jewelry, there is a possibility they are putting some of the artificial thing in that, so that will be considered as the indirect material. Like in the sugar industry, in the energy drinks, the sugar is the main direct material. But other than that, for example, they are using some of the colors, they are using some of the flavors. So that will be considered as the indirect material. In the same way, any person who is in the production process will be called the direct labor. But any person or any labor or any worker who is not producing something, but what they are doing, they are helping the production process. Okay, for example, the supervisor is there, the caretaker is there, so that person is looking at that they are working properly or not. There may be a possible the person is writing all the ins and outs, the person is loading or unloading the goods. Okay, so all that will be considered as what? Indirect labor. So indirect material, indirect labor will be included where? In the factory overhead. Other than that, there are obviously so many other expenses are there. We just start with some of them. For example, if the company is there, obviously they are using the fuel for the machines. The fuel may be a petrol, it may be a diesel, it may be a gas. So any type of the fuel they are using to run the machine, so that will be part of the factory overhead. Means all the other expenses for the production purposes other than direct material and direct labor, they are considered in the factory or production overhead. For example, if there is any repair or maintenance work in the factory, so the basic, you can say, repairs and the maintenance, not the overhaul thing, so that will be in the factory overhead. For example, if your factory is not owned by you, you have to pay the rent, so that rent of the factory is the part of the production overhead. For example, if there is any repair of the machine is there, so again that is part of the factory overhead. Then for example, they are using any oils, they are using any lubricants used in the machines, so all that is again the cost in the factory, so that is the part of the factory overhead. For example, they are using some electricity for the power purposes, they are using some gas, some water, so even the internet, even the mobile phone or any other thing that they are using in the factory. For example, there is insurance. Insurance of what? The insurance of the machine may be there, insurance of the building is there, or insurance of the workers who are working in the factory, so that is also part of what? Part of the factory overhead. Then if the factory is not owned by you, obviously you have to pay the rent, so that is part of the factory overhead. But if the factory is owned by the business, so in that case the cost of depreciation for the factory, so that is part of the factory overhead. So the depreciation of the machine, the depreciation of the building, the depreciation of the tools, so anything which is a non-current asset that is in the factory, like a tool, like a machinery, some equipment, some buildings, so all that will be depreciated because they are the non-current assets. So the cost of that depreciation will be part of the factory overhead. So we have a main 3 items that should be included in the production. So direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead, or what we say the production overhead. So if we add all these 3 things, what we get the total manufacturing cost, or what we say the cost of the production. So to produce something, so the basic 3 material, labor, and factory overhead are included, and all the indirect material, indirect labor, indirect costs are included in the factory overhead. I hope you have understood that concept of the material, labor, and the overhead. But still, if you have any question, if you have any doubt, you can ask me in the comment section. Thank you very much.